Instead of looking for the best people, look for the worst people and make sure you don't hire them.
Yeah, because the outcomes are disproportionate. Not hiring the best employee into the team is not going to destroy it. Hiring the bad one might destroy it. And that's going to be a multiplier effect that you don't want in your company.
Welcome to Tech Teams Today. Today's guest is Gene Linetsky, CTO of Embroker. Gene has been a founder, CTO, and engineering leader across many industries. He's built and scaled teams from early stage startups to large enterprises. Gene, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I want to start with wearing a lot of hats. So you've worn the CTO hat across, correct me if I'm wrong, more than a dozen companies?
Probably half dozen, yeah.
Okay, so close. From security software companies in the early 2000s, very different than fintech today. If you had to pick one leadership principle that's stayed consistent across all those roles, what would it be?
It was about motivation. I started intuiting this principle even before I stumbled upon a wonderful formulation by Daniel Pink that people are mostly motivated by autonomy, mastery, purpose. And when I read his book, it just clicked so strongly. In any team of people, if you don't know exactly what motivates every team member that you are taking care of, or the team member of the team you are part of, then you're at a disadvantage. And in the end, you won't be as effective as a leader as you might be. Again, if you don't understand the autonomy, mastery, purpose needs of every member of your team, then you'd be at a disadvantage.
So like that kind of connects to like why, your why, right? Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Like Simon Sinek, right? Yeah, that's a thing that's always been big with me is like why do you want to do this, right? If you don't have a good why, or if your why is just money, you can only go so far, right?
Yeah. Well, you would say that maybe there are more than one why. Obviously, people need money to take care of
Well,
their,
yes. Yeah,
but at the same time, just money enough is not gonna turn a person into a team member. They will be mostly for themselves.
right. Exactly. And so having the CTO hat at so many different roles and so many different verticals, what is sort of your 90-day playbook when you start a new CTO role and sort of what are some of the red flags that you look for?
Well, that realization came later to me in my career than it should have, unfortunately. But and it's so obvious in hindsight, and that is that as a CTO, you're a member of at least two teams and probably even three teams. One team is the team that you're taking care of, the team you're supporting, that's your engineering team or technology team. The other one is the executive team inside the company. And the way you operate within those two teams are very, very different. And the third one, especially in CTOs, for CTOs who are not necessarily the glorified VP of engineering executives, it's the board. It's the board. So as a CTO, you're taking care of basically three entities. You're taking care of your team that you've hopefully helped build and motivate and become stronger and stronger over time. Number two is the company itself, personified by the executive team. But of course, the company exists to not only take care of customers, but also make money for shareholders. And as a member of at least participating in board meetings and sometimes even sitting on a board in smaller companies, you just need to understand how all these three teams interoperate. And if you haven't figured it out in the first 19 days, you should really rethink your tenure in that particular company. So that would be my short advice. Figure out what your position and how you can help most effectively in your three roles. It's not just one role. You are taking on three roles, and you need to be always cognizant of what you're doing for your team, what you're doing for your company, and what you're doing for your shareholders.
And what is that what you would say is the biggest difference between a VP of engineering and a CTO? Is the VP of engineering doesn't need to worry about the other two?
It's the as you I'm sure you know you've worn many hats in this business. The definitions vary, but maybe a slight majority of people will say that the CTO takes care of the strategic direction of the company. And usually there is an engineering team, there is an engineering manager of a high caliber, and that would be the VP of engineering. So the CTO solves problems across the three entities that I've just outlined, the three teams or three sets of goals. And the VP of engineering is mostly focused on the performance and happiness and deliverables of the engineering team.
So that makes sense. So you built engineering cultures at, startups, hypergrowth startups, and also major enterprises. How does your leadership style sort of adapt between those massively different cultures and scales?
Well, since we've stumbled upon, and due to your wonderful questions, by the way, stumbled upon this dichotomy or trichotomy between your three roles, in every company that you encounter yourself at, the combination and the balance of challenges between the issues that you are encountered within these three teams are going to be very different. And if you've done your job and figured it out in the first 30 or 60 or 90 days, hopefully, then your approach is dictated of what you find on the ground. It's one of my engagements was in a situation where the engineering team was pretty much quitting every day. I joined the company, and then a couple of weeks later, because people have given notices earlier, I ended up with a team that was half of what I thought I had. So that's the obvious challenge that needs urgent, immediate attention. But in other companies, the challenge is not that. The engineering team has strong leadership built in already. Speaking of good VP of engineering, if you have one, don't let them go, please. And if that's the case, then other challenges might be in some disconnect or misalignment between engineering and other departments. Sometimes the executive team doesn't quite understand the criticality of some of the projects on the engineering side, and the engineers are famously reluctant, I would say, and sometimes not even in a good position to explain why this piece of technology or this capability is strategic for the company. So it varies. But again, if you have the right framework, if you do understand that you are playing three roles and playing toward three sets of stakeholders, then you will be able to assess your challenges and build a plan to address them.
So, Adam Broker, sort of shifting gears a little bit, you're CTO of a company in an industry that is super highly regulated and values that security and stability. How do you still move fast as an engineering organization with those sort of constraints and considerations?
Great question. And I wish I could answer it in such a way that people who are listening will say, oh, that's what I'm missing. That's what I should have been doing in my company that's also highly regulated and maybe operating in the industry that's not necessarily forward-looking or future-proof. But the reality is it's never going to be easy. So in these cases, I think the more or less universal approach, to the extent it can be universal, is try to internalize the issue. Try to find the people who otherwise would be outside the company, trying to be your detractors maybe, or at least your adversaries, because a good regulatory agency is in an adversarial position toward the entities it regulates, and bring that expertise in-house, where first of all, that person or that group of people cannot possibly be part of engineering because they need to check each other's work. But at the same time, that group of people has the best interest of the company's customers, the company itself, and the shareholders in mind. And this combination makes it possible to speed up some of the things that would have been very slow if the only encounter you have with regulatory entities is from the outside. They really don't care. They care about the industry, but they don't care much less about your company. So try to find people who used to be in regulatory agencies and try to attract them and say, as a regulator, you will be actually even more efficient because you will start affecting our company's policy much earlier in the development cycle. And so collectively, with you as part of our organization, we'll take care of our customers much faster than otherwise would be possible. Internalize the
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah, it's almost similar to like investment banks bringing in compliance officers that used to work at the SEC to make sure that they're in compliance, right? So
Yeah.
sounds like similar sort of approach. So I want to shift gears to hiring philosophy. So you've hired engineers obviously over a long time span, multiple industries in that time span multiple tech cycles. How do you evaluate adaptability in a candidate, especially when they're jumping into a completely new role or technology stack?
This is something that it took me many years to learn. The key with interviewing is, unfortunately, is you have to reduce your expectations. The best you can do in any interview process, even if it's super thought through and optimized over many cycles, is that you can hope to eliminate bad candidates, and that's it. No more, no less. There is no way during the interview process, even if you do assignments, even if you do projects, even if you invite the engineer or a product manager for short-term trial projects inside the company, none of that is going to give you confidence that the person is adaptable and is going to be a perfect member of the team. What you can hope to do is to try to block the candidates that would be a bad fit and cost the company a lot more than would have not hiring a good candidate be. So this trade-off between willing to let go a potentially great candidate in order to have strong defenses against hiring somebody who will disrupt the team, that's the difficult part that will probably only come with experience. But what I've learned in summary is that you have to lower your expectations. You cannot ascertain anything. You can only disprove things during the interview. And that's fine. If you know what you can control, you cannot control, at least you're not hoping to get a magic bullet on this particular team that will magically solve all its problems. What you need to do is eliminate disasters. And other than that, as one famous hirer said, smart and get things done. That's pretty much all you can decide during the interview.
Right. That's definitely a contrarian belief, but it's very interesting to, instead of looking for the best people, look for the worst people and make sure you don't hire them, right?
Yeah, because the outcomes are disproportionate. Not hiring the best employee into the team is not going to destroy it. Hiring the bad one might destroy it. And that's going to be a multiplier effect that you don't want in your company.
For sure. And what's the most underrated quality you look for in an engineering hire?
Wide variety of interests and massive curiosity. As we all know, engineers might tend to be slightly more introspective, slightly more introverted. The range of interests, therefore, is maybe lower because they're deeper into everything that interests them. And as a result, they might be slightly, at least slightly, and sometimes severely biased into in this in the way they're thinking. So people hear about the silo problems in companies all the time. The one team is doing one thing, the other team is doing the other thing, and they're not necessarily aligned. So in engineering, that danger is always present. And so we need to, during the interview process, at least hope that we find signs of this engineer is being into something else, like music or reading or sports or something else that tells you that this person is not overly focused on very few areas that might be detrimental when they start joining the team. And with the technology moving so fast and faster and faster today, you want to have somebody who's not going to be always falling on previous achievements and saying things like, I love Perl and I'm not going to code in anything else. Even if it's the most brilliant Perl coder, you don't want that person.
Right. Especially now. I mean, maybe 5 years ago you could get away with that, maybe 3 years ago, but today, if you're not constantly willing to learn new technologies and let go of things you might have mastered in the past, you don't have a lot of career moat, right? So
Absolutely.
that kind of leads to my next question, which is, we had a live version of the podcast in San Francisco. You were a panelist there. You said something that was very interesting about, with all these developers coming into the job market now and having learned how to code, or that's even debatable, using these AI based code editors and IDEs, where are the future senior engineers going to come from? So, looking at that junior developer pipeline, where are the future senior developers coming from if they're not starting out with those fundamentals and a blank screen in a code editors like anyone who learned how to code prior to all these AI based IDEs.
Yeah, ever since that panel, I've been thinking about this, and during the panel, I said I'm still trying to figure this out, and I'm afraid that my position is becoming even more controversial by now. I'm starting to think that the whole profession is going to massively transform. It's starting to look like the discussions in early 19th century, like in 1830s in New York. I'm sure you've seen that story before. It's a classic story. When there were so many horses in 1830, by the time this discussion started in 1830s, early late 20s, 1830s, there were so many horses that the horse manure is starting to pile up on the streets of New York, so that people
Yep.
won't know what to do with it. And the simple projection, because the population was growing like crazy, and obviously the horses were the main transportation. So the simple calculation would tell you, or anyone in that time frame, that a few years from now, the manure will reach the third floors of every single building in Manhattan. So what do? How do you solve this problem? Do you try to limit the number of horses? Do you try to feed them something else? And in the end, the horses were completely replaced by something else. So what I'm trying to say is that it may be that the role of junior developer will go away completely. And I would even say something even more controversial. I think that the role of straight out coder that produces the baseline code, not the people who organize the code and put code into basically the architecture of some system, but the code itself, that role might completely disappear. Just like the role of a typist disappeared, just like the role of, I don't know, taxi driver is disappearing, or a webmaster disappeared 10 years ago. And
True.
what's going to replace it is the new profession of the technical product manager. You've seen product managers in many companies are now taking up very enthusiastically the vibe coding, partially because they might feel like the engineering team, with all its rigor, all this planning, all those sprints, are not giving them results fast enough. Of course, they really quickly realized that vibe coding doesn't ever produce a production ready code, but that's going to change. And so the main skill set is going to shift from junior developers who, frankly, had always defined being done as having formulated PR, right? For a junior developer, obviously, gross exaggeration
Yeah.
to make a point, but for a junior developer, the definition of done is I submitted a PR. Ah, I'm
All
great.
right.
Understand the code enough.
We're done.
For a mid-level developer, the definition of success is I accepted somebody's PR. I understand somebody's code. I understand how it fits into our system, and it's good enough. And of course, for a senior developer, for senior engineer, none of those things make any sense, because the senior engineers are trying to solve company problems with code, or without code, or with architecture, or with parameters, with anything. It's not about code. The code is just a means to an end. And
Right.
just like the assembly developers disappeared because the compilers became smart enough, I start to suspect that junior developers will disappear. And the senior developers, to the extent that the companies will still need them in the next couple of years or whatever, until the singularity hits, will be gradually replaced, almost squeezed out from engineering departments by very technical product managers, because it's the product manager who understands the intricacies of connecting the customer needs to what the company does.
Yeah, it's funny you said that. We had a guest who was also at the panel in San Francisco, the live podcast, Arun Shankar, the director of engineering at
I
TUI.
remember him.
And he said, I'm not hiring software engineers, I'm hiring product engineers. I'm looking for people that think about product, and code is just a means to an end. And I was like, that's very interesting, especially me being self-taught developer that became a product manager. I don't know if that's your definition of a technical product manager, but yeah, that's super rare in my experience after, leaving product management. I thought every product manager was technical. I didn't realize. I know it's funny, right? And then I went to other software companies and I realized most product managers don't know how to code. And I was very surprised by that, because I was like, how much can you possibly understand the product if you don't understand the technology underneath it? And I might get some flack for saying that, but it seems like in 2025, maybe I was on to something. But anyways, let's move on before we upset the audience too much. So I knew this was going to be a great episode because I know you have a very unique perspective, and I really think it's a very interesting and probably accurate way of looking at the world right now and the future. But let's just talk about teams a little bit. So you've scaled teams during periods of intense like product evolution, like at TrueML, for example. What's the hardest part of scaling without, losing velocity?
It's that question had been studied by business majors and computer science majors and everywhere we're in between for many years, right? You know about the mythical man months. How do you scale a team without losing velocity? The first thing to realize, even though it's in every textbook and in every book on a subject, and for some reason people still kind of neglect it, is that the overhead for communication grows much faster than the size of the team. And if you haven't figured out the communication processes or the communication culture even within the engineering team, it's going to bite you pretty painfully in a bad place pretty soon. So the most important part is figure out two things. Number one, thoroughly understand how information flows within the team and through the team, inside and outside, across the company. And also understand whether there is a horizontal communication within the team itself. That's very important because as a manager, you're not going to be in a position to understand and control all the flows or even know of their existence. And so it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode, and that is motivation. If you're not sure that every single member of the team has his or her motivation aligned sufficiently to the team's and the company's goals, no amount of communication and no amount of improving the scalability of the team by any kind of processes will help because the nodes of the graph, so to speak, are faulty. But even if every single member of the team understands what she's doing, how her career is impacted by what she's doing right now or in the future, how the company is growing, how she is growing with the company, how her particular area is truly reliant on her expertise, how her mastery is growing, and how the whole thing is tying together with her job satisfaction, which is one of the biggest fuels for motivation going forward. If you don't understand, even if all of that is ideally figured out for the entire team, there might still be a bias, just culturally from the way the team was formed, that prevents effective communication. And again, communication is the biggest killer of efficiency. I recently discovered several tools, and we picked one of the best, if not the best, in my opinion, maybe a bit better in the market right now. But this tool is called Pharos.ai. I highly recommend people to check it out. It's very inexpensive, and it plugs into all the relevant systems and pretty much gives you both the development velocity readings directionally, because in absolute terms they might not mean much, and also how they square with the sentiment within the team, and that's very important. If people start feeling less motivated, you'll see those signals that are indirect much earlier than they might start impacting your performance. So try to find the right tools. And the last thing I will say in that direction is that at many companies, I've found that people are very concerned about spending another dollar, but they're much less concerned about spending another hour of engineering or anybody else's time. So try to help your company instill the culture where saving a dollar is at least not more important than saving an hour of a person's time, or even several people when they're sitting in a useless meeting.
Yeah, meetings. I feel like meetings were a problem before remote work. And I remember my first CTO had a rule which was if you're not learning and you're not contributing, feel free to just walk out. You don't need to ask for permission. You can just walk out of the office, go back to your desk. You don't need to explain anything to anybody. And you need to have a lot of trust and autonomy in your team to trust that they're truly not learning anything or contributing anything. And it made us much more agile and efficient. We had way less meetings than most engineering orgs probably do, especially now with remote, where I mean, people probably spend a lot of time in meetings where they're like, what am I doing here? I'm not learning anything. I already know this and I'm not contributing anything. Therefore, this is a worthless meeting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, as you were speaking, it made me think of another thing that people might find useful for scaling engineering teams. The proportions and the balance between different specialties and different level of experience within the team are super important. because that also goes to motivation. As people progress in their career, they're more motivated to mentor. And obviously, younger engineers want to impress senior engineers. And that dynamic greatly helps if you have the right balance. If you have too many juniors, nobody is there to mentor them. If you have too many seniors, then there is not enough juniors or other professionals. Maybe seniors are starting to move their knowledge toward product management and have joint sessions with product managements, even in vibe coding. So the balance of skills and balance of experience is diversity in any sense is super important in companies. I have to say that Embroker has a super international distributed team. Half of our engineering team is in Latin America, and we managed to the company's delight to set it up in such a way that every single engineer, regardless of where she is, feels like a member of the team. Even if she's a contractor, it doesn't really matter how the mechanism of her getting paid through some third-party company. Nobody really cares. She's a member of this particular teamlet, and that's what she's proud of. That's what she's contributing.
Yeah, and I think that's two things. It's treat everybody the same, whether they're remote, whether they're in office, whether they're hybrid. Another thing I think is communication can't just be one way, up or down. It has to go up and it has to go back down, right? And then horizontal. If it's just going up, you have a problem. If it's just going down, you have a problem. If it's not going horizontally, you have a problem. So I think that's also something that a lot of companies get wrong is we need to update the VPs and the VPs need to update the C levels, right? Then they need to update the board. The board needs to update the shareholders, right? But no one's taking all that information and sending it back down, right? Like, here's the feedback we're getting, and then when that goes back down, sharing that horizontally across, each part of the company. And that's hard to do, right? It's hard to figure that out, but I think it's critical to success.
Absolutely. Well, what you've described in the first three instances are really not communication. Communication implies that there will be feedback and back and forth. Those are just information dumps, and they create noise and not much else. So one of the principles that you were asking me earlier, what I learned in my career, and one of them is very simple. It doesn't matter what you say. It only matters what they hear. And that kind of forces you to understand that communication is useless until it registers and you know to what extent it registered.
Yeah, so basically you're saying to append to what I said, you need to be able to respond back. It can't just be, all right, we got this from up top. This is what we're going to do now. It's no, we got this from up top, but based on what we know, send this back up, right?
Yeah, basically, yes.
Okay. Just clarifying for the audience and for my own personal knowledge. So shifting gears a little bit, acquisitions and mergers. I think this is more important now than ever before. Not every engineering leader has worked through an acquisition or merger. I did for the first few times in the past 5 years or so. I feel like the rate of mergers and acquisitions in M&A, as a lot of people say, will increase as the software world just sort of consolidates. You're not going to see 75 software automation, workflow automation companies or 100 document management system companies. It's just not an efficient market, right? So I would ask you, having been a CTO through multiple mergers and acquisitions, what advice would you give to engineering leaders who are maybe about to go through an M&A or haven't, but want to know what that process looks like and how they should prepare themselves?
Right. Well, remember we were talking about your membership as a CTO in three teams and three sets of stakeholders. In an M&A, this collapses a little bit because in an M&A, usually the board is heavily involved in the process, and you would trust them to take care of the interests of the board and to extend the interest of the company in the sense that boards really care about making sure that the employees are whole, that there is no huge inequities in how employees are compensated in a successful M&A. So what you get to focus, and that's almost a privilege and in many cases a delight, is to making sure the two things happen. One, that to the extent that engineering has unique knowledge about how every single major meaningful piece of technology and capability, technological capability helps the customers to make sure that in an acquisition, that capability is not lost, that the acquiring company still can satisfy the basic needs of the customers that are enabled by this particular technology. And maybe that's the real reason, the whole reason why it's being acquired. And number two, you need to understand the role of your existing or remaining engineering team, because some people might take, I don't know, huge bonuses to leave. Acquisitions are very different. And so sometimes the engineering team is the prize that being acquired. Sometimes it's just a cost center. You need to very quickly understand the value of your existing engineering team to the acquirer. And once you do that, your last thing is you have to take care of your team. If you know that the customers will be taken care of, maybe by the existing organization in a larger acquirer, then you have to make everybody understand what unique value your small team is bringing to the big table. And if it doesn't, you better negotiate good severance packages and the termination for them, because at this point, the company is taken care of, the customers are taken care of, the shareholders are taken care of, and then your responsibility is to make sure that every member of your engineering team can progress on her career.
Yeah, I probably should have split that question into mergers as one and acquisitions as another, but they always get looped together, right? So I would say merging. So advice for two engineering orgs that are merging together. Sort of, what would your advice be for an engineering leader who's about to deal with that for the first time?
Immediately establish the relationship with your counterpart in the other company. Depending on the size, it might feel like you're superior or junior, just based on the size of the combined entities, size and maybe revenue. And again, as always, you have to understand what that person's motivations are and how they are connected to the existing team, the existing technologies, and the way those technologies help customers. Once you understand that, you have to make that person your ally. You have to figure out what common interests can be satisfied together and what compromises will have to be made, if they will have to be made, in reconstituting a single engineering organization in a combined entity. You don't want to create the situation where it's always going to be segregated and always going to be tension. It's always going to be, well, we did it this way, it's better because we did it. Unless there are cases where the merger really keeps very strong segregation between the deliverables and the capabilities between the two teams. But that's less frequent, because the whole point of merger is to realize combined capabilities and economies of scale. So again, as a CTO, just accept that a lot of your job is psychoanalysis and psychotherapy and essentially HR, the soft skills, empathy, all that stuff, and try to find allies everywhere in every single department of the company you're merging with, to make sure that you are collectively working on the same problem instead of being contentious about who's getting what in
Right.
an entity.
And how do you design processes that don't slow a team down necessarily, but still ensure quality, compliance, security, especially in a regulated industry like, in broker, you guys are pretty highly regulated, but even a non-regulated industry.
Um, I have a very strong personal bias for trying to let processes emerge naturally. I'm always afraid that anything designed has the potential of being designed by committee and designed in the absence of some context. And as an exec, you're always going to be in the absence of a lot of important contexts, which is fine. You cannot know everything. You better not know everything, because that would mean that your team is not no better than you are, really. So it's not the universal answer. Just basically doesn't exist to this. I'm not sure how to answer this.
No problem. So don't, basically, is your answer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't. One thing you can do is try to encourage your teams and then the good father, the good mechanism for this is those root cause analysis sessions after incidents. Figure out what went wrong and what every aspect of the team's well-being, including capacities, the balance of skills, the balance of experiences, the communication breakdowns, how it can be translated into doing things better in the future. Usually people do that, but sometimes they don't go wide enough and don't look at the base process that may have holes that resulted in this issue. So the last question in every root cause analysis should be, and sometimes it don't go as far. They don't go as far as, is there anything in our processes that may have contributed to this incident? If yes, go and change it. If no, great. Acknowledge that the process that this was part of is in itself not a culprit.
And so it's build your processes based off the mistakes you make and what you learn from those mistakes.
Tweak them, yes.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So shifting gears again. So now we're going to entrepreneurship. So you've helped entrepreneurs build and sort of validate prototypes. And I'm wondering if you have a framework deciding whether something is ready to go or not, from prototype to MVP to production.
No, there is no framework. Put it out and see what happens. There is absolutely no way to predict the future, unfortunately, which is, by the way, really interesting. People who believe in determinism, people who believe in like basically physics, that every configuration of particles is the one and only reason for the next configuration of particles, will sometimes become fatalistic and say there is nothing I can do. I think it is what it is. Things evolve the way they are, and it's all fatalism. But being deterministic doesn't mean that things are predictable, and so it's always going to be fun to discover what's unfolding and to see after the fact how the company's processes, how your actions, how the team's deliverables contributed to success or maybe sometimes to failure.
Yeah, don't spend years perfecting a product. Just get it to a minimum
Exactly. You
viable
can
state. Get it in
exactly.
people's hands. Yeah.
It's the nature is so complex that trying to predict it is a foolish errand. The Our success in physics and quantum theory, by the way, made us very cocky. We started thinking that our formulas will predict whatever happens in the future, but do realize that formulas and every single successful theory covers such a tiny sliver of nature, and most of the methods that industry and technology are using in order to predict the future or try to control it are numerical methods. There is no formula that gives you the answer. You have to spend compute. And that's why we're spending massive amounts of compute right now on very interesting problems.
So now we're gonna go into a lightning round, but feel free to take as long as you want to answer them. But looking back at your career, sort of what's one risk that you're glad you took, and maybe one you might avoid if you had the chance to go back in time?
Every single startup was a huge risk. I was giving up certainty and sometimes income in order to do something. And it's almost always the right thing. And sometimes it's the wrong thing. And it's impossible to tell ahead of time whether it's going to be that or not. But look, this is your last life on this particular planet. Why not? What are you going to regret? Doing things or not doing things? Just do it.
And maybe a risk that you took that you wish you didn't
Oh, yeah,
take.
yeah. I forgot about the second part of your
No.
so the risk I took and I shouldn't have, even though it played out and resulted in success. On reflection, now I understand that I subjected the company in question. I'm not going to name it because I mean, right now it's successful. There is nothing that threatens it. But there was several years ago at one of the companies I was working, there was a transition to SOC compliant environment, and the environment before that was so complex that the transition had to have been very iffy. And so my decision to go ahead with it, even though there were so many unknowns, whether it's going to work in production, was super risky. The risk paid off, but on reflection, I think it was too much risk. And unfortunately, sometimes you will learn if the decision you're making is carrying too much risk until after.
Makes sense. So yeah, it's what's your risk appetite, right?
Yeah. And
So,
unfortunately, sometimes it's the social pressure and the need for people to be self-consistent. If the CTO promised something, it's going to happen, damn it. Sometimes you have to like stop yourself from thinking this way and say, I'd better accept the social defeat here and get a pie on my face in front of my colleagues than subject my board and my company and my customers to this risk.
so you've moved between founder roles and executive leadership roles. Sort of, how do you decide when it's time to start something new, so found something versus going to work at a company that's essentially someone else's vision?
Well, you invited me for controversial opinions. I don't think that anybody decides anything. There is no free will. Your mind is way bigger than your tiny conscious part of it, and it decides on your behalf, and hopefully always in a good direction. But look, you're listening to this podcast right now. A series of random events led to this, and hopefully something that you've heard here in the future will trigger your mind's decision in the direction that will benefit your teams and your career rather than not. So basically, what's happening is that by being in the right environments, by interacting with the right people, by being fulfilled in your career, by being curious, you're always preparing your mind for the future decisions that will be more optimal than if you're narrowly focused on something and don't care about everything else.
And they're based on the collective conscious or subconscious of your entire life's experience, right?
Well, you put it in a much more beautiful way than I was trying to.
Yeah. Final question. If you go back to your earliest role as a CTO, what one piece of advice would you give yourself?
Shut up and listen. Stop talking.
That's a great one. I'd probably do the same. Gene, thank you so much for coming on the show. I knew this was going to be a great episode. You didn't disappoint. Is there any way for anyone who wants to follow your work, either on an individual basis, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, or anything you're doing at Embroker, where can people reach out?
LinkedIn is perfect, and I'll always try to help. Just ping me.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show. And for the audience, if you enjoyed this episode, we talk to engineering leaders every week. So don't forget to like the episode, share it if you want, and subscribe to Tech Teams Today on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Gene, once again, thanks for coming on the show. Great episode. Everyone, good evening and good luck.
Thank you so very much for having me, Matt.